Hi, everybody. My name is Ling. I am from Toronto, Canada, and I am a board-certified behavior analyst and have worked in the field of BCBA for approximately 15 years and have had extensive experience dealing with extreme challenging behaviors such as self-injury. So, for example, you may see a child hitting their head or their body and causing self-harm. I've also handled a lot of aggression, vocal stereotypy, physical stereotypies, and worked using functional behavior assessments to reduce and eliminate these behaviors. So having been in the field for approximately 15 years, I have seen the ups and downs of functional behavior assessments, how functional behavior assessments have been used inappropriately and ineffectively, but also I've seen how functional behavior assessments can be used in the most effective way to assess and address problem behavior. I also wanted to speak to Adam's comment about the audience here and how the majority of you are women, and he did raise a concern about the clients that are growing older and becoming a lot more challenging in terms of handling aggression, because most of the population is male, and Adam had mentioned that that there is a need for more male therapists to handle problem behavior. But I'd like to tell you that we won't necessarily need that, because if you know how to assess appropriately and deal with challenging behavior, you won't really need male therapists to work with them. And I can attest to that because I currently have a much older client who is 6 feet tall, has Down syndrome and autism, is nonverbal, and engages in severe problem behavior like aggression, taking off his clothes, peeing on the floor. But with effective assessment and treatment, I have not had to use mechanical or physical restraints on him, and have been able to manipulate his environment and change his behavior for the better. So a lot of my staff are female therapists, and I hope that from today's presentation that I'm able to share or even get you to think in a behavior analytic way so that you won't have to resort to extreme measures of dealing with challenging behavior. Okay. So I just want to say also I'm very honored to present here. Back in a home in Ontario, they are very excited that I am here presenting and sharing this information with you. Okay, so I'm just going to talk to you about a case study of mine. It's a little boy. I'm just going to name him Jack for confidentiality reasons. He is 6 years old, diagnosed with moderate to severe autism. He's also described as someone who's very happy, energetic, loves to run around, and you can say that he has a really big, happy personality. However, despite having this big personality of his, he also engages in a lot of problem behavior that scares off a lot of his therapists and his parents. So some of these behaviors look like slapping his therapist, pulling their hair, biting them, biting himself, property destruction, such as like picking up his chair, throwing it across the room, and even flipping the tables. And sometimes he will also take off his clothes and pee all over the floor, and actually laugh about it when he gets a reaction from others. Just a question from the audience. How many of you work with children like Jack? Raise your hands. That's a good half of you. Oh, there's a lot more. So she has 2 hands up. So I would imagine that you're trying to find an effective solution to assess and identify why this problem behavior occurs. Okay. So despite this, a lot of the therapists and the parents and his own parents were afraid of him because he would engage in such disruptive behaviors. It even got to the point that other parents had requested that this child not be around their own other children at the clinic. So, talking about Jack, I just wanted to talk about some different explanations that other professionals provide. So other different explanations, other reasons other professionals provide behind his behavior. And I do want to warn you in advance that I am providing a behavior analytic perspective on why challenging behavior occurs, and it may not necessarily align with the perspectives of other professionals in this audience. Not to say that it is wrong, I am just saying that this is the perspective from the behavior analysts in North America and just all over the world in general. So I just want to share that with you. Okay, so here's one explanation that I hear often from other professionals. He acts that way because he has autism and perhaps ADHD. So you should try to be more patient and accept him as he is. Now, I don't disagree with him. He is absolutely right, because we should accept individuals as they are, and we should try to understand where they're coming from. But having autism and their diagnosis as a basis for the behavior does not teach us how to change that behavior. It doesn't show us how we need to change that behavior. So we, as clinicians, have the obligation to teach and communicate strategies on how to help kids like Jack not hurt themselves and hurt others, because they have the right to effective treatment in order to help them live more meaningful lives. So here's another explanation. He acts that way because he has a neurochemical imbalance. So you may want to consider medical alternatives, or in other words, medication. While medication can be used to assist and treat problem behavior, and it can change behavior, it should not be the first solution that we all go to. Mainly because I just want to talk about a study that had been done in Ontario where there was a study published in around 2017 that over 40% of people with developmental disabilities were prescribed psychotic medication, antipsychotic medication, and yet 60% of those that were prescribed did not have the psychiatric diagnoses. And this is concerning because what's happening is that there's an overprescription of medication and not enough addressing underlying functions of the reasons why these behaviors occur. And we all know with medication that there can be some negative side effects with that and can have a long-term impact on their quality of life. However, it's not to say that medication should not be used. It can be used in conjunction with behavior assessments. It's just that they need to be in alignment, and you need to identify the causes for problem behavior. He acts that way because he has a sensory processing disorder. So, solution, and I don't know how many of you heard this as a solution, but he needs a weighted vest, a couche seat, so a bubble seat for them to sit on, and some jewelry so that it will reduce his biting. He should also have more movement breaks to help him self-regulate. Now, this was actually a strategy brought on by an occupational therapist working on my team, and a lot of other professionals had agreed with her that this should be the solution. And I, as a behavior analyst, like to keep an open mind about ways to address problem behavior. And I want to give the benefit of the doubt, but I do so with hesitation and a clear perspective. So I would draw a condition line on the graph as to when this sensory diet intervention started and track the amount of problem behaviors that occur based on her intervention. And what had actually come about was that his behavior worsened even more as a result of the frequent movement breaks, because he just became a lot more reactive, hyperactive, and engaged a lot more aggression to trying to escape work tasks. Also, the weighted vest and the jewelry, he did not respond to well, and even when we implemented, it did not increase his cooperation whatsoever. So that intervention was discarded based on the data that we had collected. So I'm not saying that these professionals are wrong about their opinion, but parents come to us because the parents that you work with come to us because they struggle with handling problem behavior and they don't know what to do. And so it's up to us as clinicians and practitioners to find the most effective way to assess and treat problem behavior. So looking at physiological and psychological events like chemical imbalances, anxiety, sensory overload, the diagnosis, or even the child's bad attitude does not necessarily mean that these, while they may be attributed to problem behavior, they may not necessarily be the cause of the problem behavior. Does that make sense? Okay, so it's up to us to identify the function of these problem behaviors. So let me talk about the 4 functions of behavior. Is anyone here, raise your hand if you are familiar with what the 4 functions of problem behavior are, or behavior, just generally behavior. Nobody. I see a couple. So, right there. So the 4 functions, according to ABA, there's 4 functions of behavior. 1 is access to tangibles. So I'm going to try to explain this in more layman's terms. So access to tangibles means access to what you want. They could be preferred things, items, anything. They're mostly just things or events. We also have automatic reinforcement. So this can either be automatic positive in a sense that you are looking to gain some sort of sensory stimulation. So we see this happen a lot with some children with autism who engage in a lot of hand flapping because they enjoy the physical sensation that it produces. Or in our case for negative automatic reinforcement, I gave Advil to another speaker because she had a headache. Now she engaged in asking for Advil because she wanted to get rid of that headache, so that's negative automatic. She's trying to get rid of a negative sensation. Then we have social attention. So this is gaining the attention from others. This could be positive attention, like, yay, good job, looking for some praise. Or it could mean that you like any attention. It could be a negative reaction. It could be pissing somebody off and getting them to get in a fight with you. That's some sort of social reaction that you're looking for. And in the case of escape from demand and aversive situation, this is when we try to avoid or remove ourselves from things that we do not want to be around. So from the case for children with autism, I know a lot of them, may not necessarily enjoy being at a birthday party because of all the noise, the singing, the chaos. So some may likely want to run out of that birthday party, and that is often the case. And we, with parents with kids with autism, it can be hard for them to arrange birthday parties because their children don't appear to enjoy being in those social situations. So let me get to it. What is a functional behavior assessment? A functional behavior assessment is a broad category that encompasses a number of different methods for researchers and clinicians to assess problem behavior. So the goal of a functional behavior assessment is to look at under what situations problem behaviors occur. So you're looking at things that happen before the problem behavior occurs. You're also looking at the consequences, the things that happen after that reinforce and maintain this problem behavior. And then you use this information from the antecedent conditions, so situations, things that happened before, things that happened after the problem behavior, and use that information to treat and address the problem behavior. So that's the nutshell of what the goal of an FBA is. And almost always, interviewing, so these three processes are involved in a functional behavior assessments. One, you're going to interview the people who are involved with the person using interview forms or questionnaires. You will also be looking at directly observing the problem behavior in their natural environment. It could be in a clinic, but ideally it would be at their home or at school. And then you would also track data on this problem behavior because you want to get a true baseline of why they engage in such behaviors or how often they engage in such behaviors so that you know after you do your assessment and implement your treatment, that your treatment is effective. Okay. So those three processes pretty much are summarized into three different categories of functional behavior assessments. So I'm going to talk about the first two types of functional behavior assessments. The first two are the direct FBA and the indirect FBA. And these two fall under the category of descriptive functional behavior assessments because a lot of the times you're going to be describing the behaviors and documenting the occurrences, how often they occur. So with an indirect FBA, as I mentioned, a lot of it is interview informed. So you'll be using a list of questions to identify the probable causes of behavior. And in your direct functional behavior assessments, you're going to be using your observation and ABC data collection. And you'll be documenting how often this behavior occurs, what happens before, and what happens after. Now, the third category of functional behavior assessments is the experimental FBA. And this can be only conducted and run by a board-certified behavior analyst. And from my understanding, there's probably one or two in this country, and I hope that a lot of you will step up and be able to provide true functional behavior assessments for the children that you work with, given that a lot of you are dealing with these concerning behaviors here with your clients. So in an experimental FBA, it requires direct manipulation of environmental conditions, and I will get into that a little bit more later. And with experimental FBAs, that is the most accurate measure of assessing why a behavior occurs. You're looking at the true function of the behavior. Whereas with descriptive functional behavior assessments, you're identifying probable causes of behavior, so it's not always going to be accurate. So let's look at indirect FBAs. Oh no, you cannot see the information on this form, but just to give you a quick summary, there's a number of questions in order, and you would interview either the parent or school teacher and circle under what conditions these behaviors occur. And at the end, over here, there's a total scoring sheet. At the end of the form, there is you can score the total and then identify what's the likely cause of the problem behavior. So it could be social, automatic negative. There's another FBA form here that's indirect. It's the questions QABF. It's the questions about functional behavior, questions about behavioral functions, excuse me. And in here, you would also score the frequency of how often the behavior occurs. And at the end, calculate it at the bottom and see which condition these behaviors are likely to occur. Okay, so now I'm going to get into direct functional behavior assessments. How many here conduct ABC data or collect ABC data? Raise of hands. So it's probably 1/10 of you. Okay, that's good. So I'm using this form here is a parent-friendly version and that I give, or even a school-friendly version that I give to staff or I can give to parents so that they can collect this data. I have questions on these forms, so it helps guide them as to what to write, because oftentimes what happens is that in ABC data sheets or ABC forms, the data recorded is not accurate. So for example, a parent may say, my child acted this way because he was sad. And using that type of description is erroneous because we don't know what the behavior sad looks like. Behavior needs to be written in observable terms that can be seen from other people. So one person who's sad may look like their face is flat, whereas sad could look like tears rolling down the face and yelling and crying. So we need to have behavior written in clear, observable terms. So some of the questions I put in these forms to get information from parents is, so antecedents, what happened before the event? So what were you saying and doing before the incident? What was the child doing and saying before the incident? Where were you and the child? And what happened before this whole event happened? So let's say they just came back from shopping, or they came back from a party, and then they were home, and then something occurred here. So this is the behavior. What kind of behaviors did the child display? What did the child say? And how long and frequent did these behaviors last? And the consequences, how did you react to these behaviors? How did the child react after the incident? And what happened right after the event? So I tried to get as much information from the parents and teachers as much as possible. So here's a quick example. This is a date here. We have time was at indoor recess, classroom, and we have two teachers, Mrs. Hannah and Mrs. George, and Mrs. Hannah fills out the form saying she was in the classroom with other children. She was about 20 feet away from Bob, and then she gave the instruction, it's time to clean up. At that time, Bob was lining up blocks and engaging in scripting and flapping his hands at that time. And the event was that it was just time to finish indoor recess. Behaviors, Bob started crying, and then he started head-banging his head to the floor. And this lasted about 10 minutes. He hit his head repeatedly about 15 times. What did Mrs. Hannah do? She said, no hurting, and she told him to stop. She gave him a big hug because she knows that he apparently likes deep pressure, and gave him some sensory toys to calm him down, and then the head banging stopped and he played with the sensory toys. As you can imagine, just based on this one instance of behavior, we can already see a pattern happening where Bob bangs his head. He was already engaged in a fun behavior. He starts banging his head. He gets some attention. No, stop. He gets some physical attention, some squeezes and hugs, and he gets a bag of fun toys. Chances are he's probably going to bang his head again when someone tells him fun time's over, because he's going to get all this fun stuff right after, even though the adult thinks that this is calming him down and it's making him feel better about the incident. All right, so let's talk about experimental functional behavior assessments. With experimental functional behavior assessments, there are generally two types. The first one is a standard function analysis, and the second one is a synthesized functional analysis. And now, before you conduct a functional analysis, you must always conduct an indirect assessment. So this means you need to go through an interview process with the parent or the school teacher about the concerning behaviors, but also observe the child in their own natural setting. The second thing you need to do before conducting a functional behavior assessment is a preference assessment. Can you give me a show of hands of who knows what a preference assessment is? Okay, so The preference assessment is basically identifying reinforcers or things that the person likes or takes to when you're giving them an option of a variety of things to choose from. So this is going to help identify the most appropriate reinforcers in the problem behavior setting. So because that's what you're going to use with testing with your functional analysis. Okay, so if I could describe a functional analysis to you, the best way I could think of explaining it was to see a functional analysis as an allergy test. You're testing behavior on a variety of conditions. So these conditions include control, attention, escape, this is alone, and tangible. So this is access to items that they want. So in the control condition, this condition is basically saturated with almost all the reinforcers. So we're looking at giving them, positive attention. We're giving them free access to things that they want. We're not bombarding them with instructions. We're just letting them be and enjoying their time without getting in their face. Okay? And in the attention condition, all these things are isolated, so you wouldn't count escape, alone, or tangible, or control. What happens with, say, with the head banging in an FA, as soon as the child engages in head banging, you give them attention. Oh no, don't do that. It's okay, don't worry. That's the attention condition. You wouldn't give them the toys, you would just only give them attention. And in the escape, you would create a condition where as soon as the child head banged, you would let them escape a task. So if they were working on something and all of a sudden they head banged their head on the desk, you'd say, it's okay, we'll take away work and let them have their free time. In the alone condition, you would not be in the room with them, or you would be far away from them and not give them any attention. And they would just not have any toys or anything to play with. They would just be having maybe a neutral task, something you would just watch to see if there's a sensory component to the head banging. So you'd watch them see if they head bang without any environmental factors around. And in the tangible condition, you would test them by once they head bang, you would give them the toys, but not the attention. Okay? So I just described that. So let me just show you a graph of what a functional analysis would look like once you've completed it. So this year, when a functional analysis, you would have 5-minute test conditions. And so the conditions are run usually about a minimum, absolute minimum of 3 tests to show some consistency with your data. Typically, it's run with 2 staff, so 1 therapist and 1 designed by a BCBA. Supervised by a BCBA. So in this case, like in this example, the attention condition was high because the frequency of head bangs was the highest, so here in this condition. And these conditions are rotated on a randomized manner. So I will not go into the synthesized functional analysis in too much detail, but the synthesized functional analysis is just a little bit different from a standard functional analysis in a sense that instead of running 4 or 5 conditions, you would only run 2 conditions. And the 1 condition is the control condition, so getting access to pretty much everything that they want, creating a condition under which problem behaviors are not likely to occur. And the second condition would be the synthesized condition, where you would have multiple multiple reinforcers occurring for that problem behavior. And you just alternate between those 2 conditions. I just want to speak to comparing FBA processes. So a functional analysis, in terms of the accuracy and the most reliable and most likely to demonstrate a functional relationship, the functional analysis is at the top. It also takes the least amount of time to conduct. Normally, when I get a referral for challenging behavior, it should take me less than a day to complete a functional analysis, because I would have interviewed the parents, set up my testing conditions, obtained consent, and I would run the functional analysis, whether the parents or the school teacher. Whereas you would have a direct FBA, sometimes this can take weeks on end, and this can be problematic, especially if you're trying to find a way to treat the challenging behavior right away. Indirect BFBAs are the least reliable, usually demonstrate a correlational relationship, and are generally more descriptive. It's not to say that, the functional analysis is a lot better than the indirect FBA. So I just want to let you know about that. So to come back to it, so what about Jack? So we conducted a synthesized functional analysis, and it did not have to relate to a sensory component, but there was combined function of escape, attention, and access to things that he liked. And in this intervention, which is primarily the most important component, is that we introduced tolerance training, teaching him to accept no, teaching him how to wait, introducing functional communication training, so getting him to request for things that he wants his way, but also learning that he has to tolerate adults having their way as well. We also applied extinction to all problem behaviors, and also worked on reinforcing cooperation, appropriate communication, waiting, and attending. And for the generalization component, there was parent training involved and school consultation to carry over these strategies. Okay. So I don't have enough time. I wanted to bring you through a visualization exercise, and maybe I can squeeze it in for next 3 minutes. So I just want you to close your eyes and just imagine yourself. I'm going to flip it back into put the perspective as you as the person about to receive a behavioral intervention. So imagine yourself as a patient in a hospital setting. You are in a hospital bed, and beside you are metal rails. You've just went through a car accident and suffered a major you suffered a brain injury, and as a result of this accident, you cannot speak or move, with the exception of your right hand being able to wave back and forth. The doctor has given you medication, and with it has side effects of thirst, dry mouth, dry nose, and you're just generally thirsty. So constant thirst and dryness is a symptom. And you really could use some water drops and a humidifier and a jug of water. One morning you wake up, and there's a glass of water beside your bed. However, you don't know how to communicate because you can't talk. But you can move your right hand. So what you do, you try to get the nurse's attention, and you start clanging on the metal rail. One of the nice nurses who's on her shift comes over, tries to make you feel comfortable, fluffs your pillows, adjusts your bed sheets, and offers you a glass of water, a sip of water. So you stop clanging because you got your water. However, with the medication side effects, you're still thirsty. So you end up trying to get the nurse's attention again. And the nurse comes back, not sure really what you want because she already helped you, made you feel comfortable, but she does the same routine. Turns on the TV, puts your favorite show on, gives you a little sip of water, and maybe a snack. The nurse leaves and her shift has ended. You're still thirsty as it goes on, so now you're clanging again, and another nurse comes in, and she's not sure what you're asking for. And you get frustrated, and you start yelling. And because more like moaning and yelling because you don't know how to communicate and you're frustrated. But eventually, she gives you some water and puts on your favorite show, tries to make you feel comfortable, and even talks to you for a bit. This has been your only way of communicating that you've been thirsty and you wanted some water. But for weeks, you've been banging on this metal rail that you now have a welt and bruise all over your hand. And the nurses have been concerned because your yelling has increased, you've been moaning a lot, and you have welts. So they look for someone to intervene. And the doctor says, or you have someone coming to look at your behavior, and what they conclude is that you're depressed. You went through a car accident, and this is your way of handling it. You're having emotional outbursts because of this. And so what they do is they put mitts on you. They put mitts on you. And you know what? They actually decreased your hitting, and your bruises have gone away, and the bruises have disappeared, you have healed. The staff are less annoyed, and the staff think that this treatment has worked. But has this treatment really worked? Do you think that the staff did a good job of assessing why you are yelling and hurting yourself? So this is a question that I would like you to think about, why you would need to conduct a functional behavior assessment. We need to identify and provide effective, precise, personally relevant, and humane treatments for challenging behavior. We really need to get to the source and try to find out why people would engage in such behavior. Okay, thank you. Super. Ederim.